Fashion was and still is an important indicator of cultural norms. In the Elizabethan era, fashion was strictly regulated based on social class and profession through the sumptuary laws passed by Queen Elizabeth. Here you can see my attempt at recreating what a woman during that era would have worn. I made it with materials found around my house, so it isn't entirely historically correct, but there's still a lot of references to what a woman of middle class standing would have worn in the Elizabethan era. Elizabethan gowns were made of three parts: the bodice, the skirt, and the sleeves. The nobility would generally, for the bodice, try and have it as stiff and decorative as possible, but a woman of middle class standing could really only try and emulate this because it didn't really have the resources to achieve that kind of look. As you can see here in this gown, it doesn't have a very stiff bodice, but it still tries to emulate this look by coming to a point where the bodice meets the skirt. It also shows popular customs of the time by having a transparent chemise, because this was very popular towards the end of the era where necklines were getting more revealing. Sleeves at the time were created to have as much volume as possible, especially for the upper nobility, because this was a fashion popularized by Queen Elizabeth herself. Again, for this gown, you can expect a more toned down version of that general idea, but it still remains. I will note that this transparent fabric was not actually used at the time, so that's not entirely historically accurate, but the ribbon adorning the sleeves was a very popular decoration during the Elizabethan era. The skirt of this gown represents two popular fashion customs of the time. The first is how the upper panel of fabric parts to reveal a differently colored lower panel of fabric, and the second is the distinctive shape of the gown. So for upper nobility, they would often try and achieve a very distinctive widening at the hips for their gowns, and they would generally do this with a farthingale or hoops of whalebone that were placed beneath the skirt to achieve this very distinctive shape. Now, for middle-class women, one would generally try and emulate this with a makeshift bum roll or scrunched up material placed at the top of the skirt to achieve this, to emulate this shape. The slight widening of this gown indicates this technique. One very important aspect of Elizabethan dress that I've not mentioned yet is fabric and dyes. Fabric was one of the things that was strictly controlled under the sumptuary laws, so a woman of this middle class standing would have worn mainly wool. Red was a popular color to dye wool because it indicated a certain level of status. The last detail that I'll touch on is one of the most distinctive fashion trends of the Elizabethan era, the ruff. Ruffs were used across a multitude of social classes and for both men and women, and were characterized by a very distinctive puffing out around the collar region and could be very dramatic. So obviously for this color, it's not as dramatic as some ruffs could be, but it's just showing what a woman might do on a day-to-day basis to emulate this very distinctive fashion trend. And that's it for my explanation of this dress. The most important thing to remember is that as an Elizabethan woman outside of court life and style, one would still try and emulate the highly popular fashions of the time, but because they lacked the social status and financial status to do so, they would often not be able to achieve the same fabrics, dyes, materials, and intricacy seen in upper level nobility.